Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, I'm going to talk about, why I love the show Van Helsing and saying goodbye to it. If you're unfamiliar with Van Helsing it is a series on Syfy. It was this horror fantasy, kind of borderline science fictional series where basically this woman, Vanessa, wakes up from a 3-year coma after basically vampires have taken over the world. Like a volcano ash blotted out the sun and all that time, and in that time frame vampires are able to come out of the woodwork and were able to take over the world. And basically it's kind of a vampire apocalypse, kind of very a la zombie apocalypse element. And Vanessa wakes up from her 3-year coma and she has superhuman ability. She isn't human, there's special circumstances with her. She's super strong and she has a ridiculous Wolverine and Deadpool-esque healing factor. So it's about humanity trying to find a way to not only survive but even potentially beat back all of this. It is based on, and I should also stress, loosely based on a comic book series just called Helsing that kind of follows because it all, spoilers but not really, Vanessa's from the Helsing lineage and stuff like that. And obviously the story of the show is set present day. The show begins in 2016 and then the 3-year time skip makes the show, at least at the beginning, take place in 2019. But I want to say the comic book is closer to the movie Van Helsing, a more traditional Victorian era style aesthetic it's kind of got going. I've never read the comic, but like I said, that's why I'm saying the comic book is more, it's more loosely based on the comic, because the comic is very different monsters, whereas the show is entirely dealing with vampires. What's also unique about the show, and I think is one of the most interesting things, is how it handles vampirism. And that's always a question of any vampire fiction of well, what do the vampire rules look like? How does that work? To my recollection, it's been a while, but none of the more traditional vampire rules of, welcome them into your house and stuff like that, it doesn't apply. Because once again, the vampires in this universe are very much like zombies. In fact, obviously vampirism is treated, it's always been kind of a virus in certain storylines and stuff, but they definitely lean into it. Oh my god, you get bit, it's only a matter of time before you go full-blown vampire. So, and there's also a hierarchy to it. You have on the lower end, you have the more ravenous people who are more they don't really think, they're just kind of we're driven by our hunger. They are the closest to zombies. But then the higher you up you get, the more intelligent and the more they can orchestrate and they can plan. There is a hierarchy, there is a leadership to all of it. And obviously that hierarchy expands as the series progresses, because the show starts all very science fictional with just, like I said, the very zombie virus element of, it's from a science fictional standpoint, breaking down vampirism and stuff like that and how it spreads and trying to find a cure for it, which ultimately we end up finding out pretty quickly early on that Vanessa's a cure for it, because any vampire that bites her becomes human again and ultimately can't be turned back into a vampire. So Vanessa, once again, she's basically a superhero in this show, and that becomes something more and more as we expand upon the lore of the Van Helsing lineage, as well as kind of the lineage of vampires. Where that all stems from is something we really get into as the show gets later and later in its series. But it's a fun show in a very obviously dark fantasy actiony type of way, but obviously because it is a horror survivor series, you do see people dropping left and right. Especially the first season leans the most into the survival horror element of it, which is always persistent, but it definitely goes more dark action, dark fantasy as the series progresses, especially in later and later seasons. So this series takes some very interesting developments and turns. Like I said, it definitely started off a little more science fiction-y and definitely leans more into the fantasy of it all. And with still some science fictional elements, especially in the final season, there's certain elements in the final season I'm that's kind of a cross between something that's typically science fictional with a fantasy element to it. Regardless, it's a great series that has a very conclusive ending, a very satisfying ending, but it's also one of those stories where it's now, I don't want to say too much, but it is another one of those series that has an open-ended ending where it's things are resolved, but there's still more story to tell if they wanted to tell some. I don't know if there was ever any talks about making any spin-offs or sequels or whatever. There's room for it, but I don't know if they'd want to. Having told the story they wanted to tell them, I don't even know if Syfy would be interested in furthering that anymore. You know, I feel like if, you know, because the show ended, wasn't it last year? Was it the year before last? I can't remember now whether that was 2022 or 2021 when the show ended. But I feel like Syfy probably would have said something before now. They probably would have jumped on that immediately. But I think they're satisfied with, I mean, the show got 5 seasons, which is awesome. I want any show at bare minimum to have that 5-season opportunity. And like I said, it ends on a very satisfying note too. So it's just a great series. If you're looking for something kind of like horror-esque, like a little scary but kind of dark and eerie and bloody and very, you know, zombie apocalypse-esque, kind of like Walking Dead, but kind of, like I said, it starts off very Walking Dead and then kind of severely becomes its own thing while still maintaining some of those Walking Dead-esque elements. It's just one of those series that kind of has everything, you know, with just like the genres that it bends and stuff like that. Like, just in totality, the show is great and just a lot of fun. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.